Hey everybody, John T from Optolingo, coming back at you with a second video. Learned a few things from doing my first video. The first thing I learned is that my camera phone maxes out at about 33 minutes or 32 minutes. The other thing I learned is that a couple of you, more than a few, watched past the 33-minute mark and noticed that my video got cut off. So that's probably more interesting than anything else. I had no idea that it was going to be such a long video when I started. I'm going to keep doing these when I feel like it, as long as people keep watching and keep asking me questions. In today's video, I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal opinion of how language learning is similar in a lot of ways to getting in shape. It's an analogy, it's a framework that I've thought about for a while. It came up in conversation a couple of days ago with a friend of mine. And I just thought I would share my opinion, my view. Maybe it'll help some people, or at least maybe it'll be a little entertaining. I don't know. So just by way of background, I have not the best family medical history. People on both sides of my family have had issues that have given me reason to just be a little bit more proactive than perhaps I was a few years ago. And so a few years ago, I decided I wanted to get in shape. And here's the first part where I think that language learning and getting in shape, where learning a language and getting in shape can have some similarities. Although I think general health and fitness is probably a topic of broader appeal than language learning is. I think that the dream, the goal of being able to achieve whatever you define as your end state is equally appealing, albeit on different scales of people. And so the interesting thing about getting in shape is a lot of people want to do it. A lot of people don't really know always where to start. There's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of people who profit from spreading misinformation out there. There's a lot of people who profit from providing low quality products that will keep you on this perpetual cycle of being at this beginner stage. And there are a handful of legitimately helpful, beneficial practitioners and resources out there, but unfortunately, in my opinion, more often than not, they're drowned out by the louder bullhorns and bigger budgets of, like I said, people who are profiting from keeping you in this sort of ongoing low-level state of hopeful improvement, but probably not so much improvement. So I think that this kind of appealed to me a few years ago. At the time, I'd set a goal to add about 20 pounds of muscle to my frame. I did that over about an 18-month period of time, which is fairly aggressive, but I did it in a healthy way, and I was pretty happy with the outcome. And I was going to the gym 4 or 5 days a week on average, just for strength training. I was doing cardio 4 or 5 times a week. Also, not always on the same days, weekends in, weekends out, depending on what I was doing. And I remember one day I was just so tired and so exhausted. I had this goal to deadlift a certain amount of weight. And I thought to myself, I'm only deadlifting once or twice a week. If I skip today, if I just take the day off, what's going to happen? And I realized in the short term, nothing's going to happen. Right? I'm not going to lose strength. I'm not going to gain strength. Whether I do the workout or I don't do the workout, in the grand scheme of an ongoing goal, in my case, it was a 2-year goal to achieve certain health indicators and performance indicators. One workout would not have a tremendous impact one way or another. But what I realized was that if I consistently skipped that workout, I would never achieve my goal. If I skipped one workout per week, and I was working out 4 or 5 days a week, it would prolong the achievement of my goal by at least 20%, maybe even more, because there's a compounding effect when you have momentum and you're keeping up with things. And I thought to myself, at the time, I was at the point where I was memorizing words, vocabulary words, in both Circassian and in Russian at the same time. And I thought to myself, it's a similar analogy. If I skip one day's review session, it's not going to have a big impact in the short term, but it will have a big impact in long term if I consistently skip an exercise session, whether it's a language exercise or whether it is a physical exertion exercise. And I will consistently have a better outcome if I do more. Not to the point of burnout, giving yourself time to reflect, to recuperate, because I think that, again, the analogy is apt in both of those categories as well. But then it occurred to me that the analogy goes a little bit further than that. So like I said before, everyone is interested in being efficient and effective. And I talked about this a little bit in my last video. Being effective means that you are doing the right things. Being efficient means that you are doing things in a short period of time, right? Or in a time with the best ROI, return on investment, of the time that you're investing in those things. And I think, again, the analogy would go even further than that. And let me try to expand on this. And I apologize if I'm rambling a little bit. I don't really pre-script these. I just kind of come up with something that I think is interesting to talk about, and I let it flow. So one of the things that I learned on my journey towards trying to improve my general health and fitness, which is a journey I'm still on. I think it's a never-ending journey. I don't care how fit you are. One of the things I learned is that there are different parameters. There are different things that you can do in order to achieve a measure, whatever you define as your measure, of health and fitness. So, a guy like Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was a bodybuilder for many years, his definition and his training protocol would be very different than somebody who's training to win a marathon, right? I think obviously. One is going to be more anabolic and oriented around building large muscles. The other one's going to be more aerobic and oriented around maximizing lung capacity, endurance, the ability to run at great speed for many, many, many miles, many kilometers, depending on where you are in the world. But at the same time, I know for a fact that successful strength trainers and bodybuilders will factor cardiovascular fitness into their program, maybe not at the same level as a marathon runner. And I know for a fact that successful marathon runners will build resistance training and strength training into their programs as well. Again, not necessarily to the same level, obviously, as a power lifter or as a bodybuilder. But the fact is, in order to achieve a well-rounded state of health, you need to make sure that you have strong muscles, you have strong bones, your lungs are able to breathe, you're able to sprint in short distances, jog or run for long distances, you have flexibility, and I think there's an emotional and a mental part of this as well, having the discipline and the fortitude to actually sit down and crank out a very intensive strength building weightlifting course, or to be able to run several miles or bike several miles or whatever it is, or to sit down and do an hour of yoga and hold a pose that's very intensive. I think there's a mental component to that as well. Likewise, when it comes to learning a language, again, one of the things that I learned a very difficult way, I'm always interested in trying to go fast. I want to learn as fast as possible. Of course, what you're learning is always a constantly moving guidepost, but I want to learn as fast as possible. That's always something. It's an urge that I always have to fight. That's in the back of my mind. And so I'm going to memorize words. I'm going to read sentences. I'm going to write down, some of these two things. I'm going to study grammar. I'm going to listen. I'm going to speak. And what I realized is that I may not like doing all of these things. In fact, some of these things I don't like doing at all. But in order to have a command of a foreign language, in as much as it is necessary to incorporate different components of fitness into an overall health and fitness program, it is important, whether you like it or not, or whether you want to hear it or not, whether you do it or not, because I don't do all of these things, at least not as consistently as I would like. It is important to factor in all of those components that I just talked about into your language learning efforts. You should be reading, you should be writing, you should be typing, you should be listening, you should be speaking, you should be attempting to gain more vocabulary, whether you're doing it through flashcards or reading structured sentences or sentence mining, whatever approach you're taking. You should understand grammar. If you've read my blog or you've seen any of my videos, you probably know I'm not a huge fan of formal grammar study, But I do think that if you are learning a language as an adult, it is valuable, it is important to have some measure of exposure to formal grammar, to understand what the concepts are, at the very least, at the very beginning of learning, so that you have some sense of how the language is structured. And I think also later on, as you try to get more advanced, to understand, are there common pitfalls that you're experiencing, or are there topical areas that you're just struggling to be able to grasp through pattern recognition alone? So for those reasons, I think that it is apt to look at language learning through a similar framework to Being in Shape. And then the last part of it is I think that the last part of the apt analogy in my mind is that it is an ongoing evolution, right? I don't care if you're a world-class athlete in an endurance sport like a triathlete or a marathon runner. I don't care whether you are looking to lift a large mass of weight, or whether you're looking to add a large mass of muscle to your frame. And I don't care whether you are looking to casually learn language X or achieve some level of mastery in language X. The reality is that in order to achieve anything that's worth achieving, you are going to have to put in the time. It's as simple as that. And being consistent requires, unless you're Superman, it requires that you pace yourself and that you not get so caught up on the end that you burn yourself out on the means, right? So what do I mean by that? For a long time, I said, I'm going to memorize 5,000 words. And I did it. I memorized 5,000 words. What I realized after the fact is that I had very limited ability to use those 5,000 words in contexts that were meaningful to a native speaker of Circassian. I later replicated that mistake and said I'm going to memorize 2,000 Russian words. And again, same thing. It did help my comprehension. Like I said in my last video and in other places, everything will work if you put in enough effort. The challenge is getting things to work in a shorter period of time and not brute forcing it. So if you are committed to achieving any goal, and in this case we're talking about a language learning goal, the most important thing is to pace yourself and make sure that you're not burning out. And I also think that, and again, this is, I think, equally applicable in health and fitness as well. The other goal is to, how do I explain this? To be flexible in your definition of success. There's this old expression that you can never be too rich or too skinny. There is no end to any level of mastery of any language. English is my first language, and I still wonder, could I have said something a bit more eloquently? I'll read something and realize that there's a word that I hadn't been exposed to or forgot what the meaning was. And this is my native language, for crying out loud. So imagine what it is like when you're learning a new language. There is no limit. There is no end point. There is no end point. That's, I think, what I'm trying to say. There is no end point that is logical where one can simply conclude, I am done. I have achieved my goal. I cannot be any smarter, any faster, any stronger, any more eloquent. There is always room for improvement. And to a certain extent, that's daunting, perhaps. But to a certain extent, it's also very liberating and very freeing. Because if you really embrace and recognize the fact that personal improvement is an ongoing evolution of who you are, the process becomes 10 times more enjoyable, because you have freed yourself of some artificial constraint that defines what some goal is at the very end. As long as you're enjoying yourself and you're making improvements, and you believe that the improvements that you're seeing are commensurate with the time that you're putting in, then you're on the right path. So I think that's all the ideas that I had in my mind at this point. So we'll end the video there, and we'll see if people keep watching these things.